The Ravenous Afflictions talent allows your critical strikes of Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction a chance to trigger Nightfall, and that immediately raises a very simple question. What happens if you go all in on a critical strike, keep forcing Nightfall over and over again, and then build everything else around empowering Shadow Bolt as much as possible? I actually experimented with it back in Midnight pre-patch season, but I never ended up uploading it because at that time, it was absolute garbage. But with the latest class tuning, Affliction Warlock received a very significant boost. All damage was increased by 15% in PvP comp, and on top of that, Shadow Bolt specifically received another 20% damage increase. The total 35% damage increase on Shadow Bolt is looking real juicy. Because that changes the entire context of the build, because what used to feel like a niche experiment now has much more real killing power behind it. If the whole idea is to force as many Nightfall procs as possible and turn Shadow Bolt into a real threat, then buffs like these are exactly what makes the concept worth revisiting. Let's start with the gear. The foundation is simple. Prioritize every piece that gives critical strike. Looking through the vendor options, the slots that do not naturally come with crits are shoulders, wrists, hands, waist, and one ring. To fix that, I replaced the shoulder and waist slots with Warmonger pieces purchased through Bloody tokens, since those fit the stat profile much better. With the conquest points I currently have, I will be picking up the wrists, trinket, and ring next. That leaves just one slot remaining. Hands. For that final piece, I'm going to craft using the Galactic Gladiator's Heraldry you get from your first Battleground win, which lets me clean up the last non-crit slot and fully commit the build to the stat spread I actually want. The last step is enchants. Let's go through the enchant options and see where we can push the stat even further. This is way too expensive. As for the enchants, since it's still very early in the expansion, they don't really seem worth the cost right now. Instead, I'm going to invest into gems first. Thankfully, those are still reasonably priced. So these are the final stats. At the moment, Critical Strike is sitting at 29%, while Haste and Mastery have not been intentionally stacked at all. So Midnight Season 1 is finally live, but let's be real, a lot of people are jumping in right now without a clue where to start. If that sounds like you, you've definitely gotta check out SkyCoach. It's a platform built entirely around helping you get more out of the game, but in a way that actually fits how you want to play. Instead of just a generic boost, they offer personalized support that's tailored to your specific character, your level, and whatever goals you're aiming for. Now, if you're a bit hesitant about these kind of services, they have a really cool self-play option. It's perfect if you just want to skip the boring grind and actually play alongside high-level pros. Stop wasting hours trying to figure everything out the hard way. Whether you're just coming back from a long break, trying to push the latest endgame content, or just want a smoother experience without the usual headache, SkyCoach has you covered. They are already trusted by over 150,000 players worldwide, and they handle a bunch of other major games too. So if you want to level up your progress this season, use the promo code below. See how far you can actually take your gameplay when you've got the right team backing you up. For the hero talent, the choice is naturally Soul Harvester. It is by far the best fit for this setup. Through Necro-like teachings, Shadow Bolt already gains a 20% damage increase by default, and whenever Nightfall procs, that bonus is pushed even further, bringing the total increase to 70%. That alone gives the entire build a much clearer direction. Next is Wicked Reaping, which adds another layer of synergy by causing Nightfall to deal additional shadow damage when it is consumed. Since this build is built around triggering Nightfall as often as possible, the extra damage starts adding up very quickly over the course of a fight. It also pairs very well with Quietus, because that talent similarly causes Shared Fate to inflict even more shadow damage whenever Nightfall is consumed. Wait, is this just a Nightfall build? Then there is a Tails Volition, which is especially useful because casting Hunt guarantees a Nightfall proc. That matters a lot for this build, since one of the biggest problems with Nightfall focused gameplay is its natural randomness. By forcing Nightfall through Hunt, you reduce that randomness and make the entire setup feel much more controlled and reliable. Next are the Affliction talents. We naturally start by taking Improved Shadow Bolt for a straightforward 40% damage increase, and then follow it up with Withering Bolt for another 30% increase on top of that. To get the maximum possible damage output, you will want to make sure the target already has at least 3 dot effects applied beforehand. Next is Cunning Cruelty, which gives you a chance to randomly trigger Shadow Bolt volley. Visually, it looks great and definitely adds to the fantasy of the build, but in terms of actual power, Because this build is not primarily focused on dot damage itself, I chose Dark Harvest over Dark Glare. Through Shard instability, you get to cast Unstable Affliction more frequently through Shadow Bolt, and that naturally creates strong synergy with Cold Weak, since each of those applications helps reduce the cooldown of Dark Harvest even further. In other words, the more aggressively you lean into the Shadow Bolt cycle, the more often Dark Harvest comes back online. Next, we take Malediction to increase critical strike chance of your main dot spells by 5%, and then pair it with Contagion, which increases their critical strike damage by another 15%. That combination fits extremely well with crit stacked setup. Next comes the core talent of the entire setup, the Ravenous Afflictions. This is what really pushes the Nightfall engine into overdrive, because it significantly increases how often Nightfall can proc from your dot critical strikes. Since this build is heavily committed to crit and invests very little into haste, I also take Cascading Calamity to pick up an extra 5% haste and smooth things out a little. For PvP talents, Jinx is absolutely mandatory. The goal is to keep Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction active on as many targets as possible, because the more dot ticks you have rolling across the battlefield, the more chances you create for Nightfall to trigger. And once Nightfall starts triggering consistently, the build really comes alive, because every proc not only empowers Shadow Ball, but also continues feeding extra damage through the various Soul Harvester interactions tied to consuming Nightfall. Now let's compare the damage of a completely unenhanced Shadow Ball to the fully amplified version this build is designed to produce. First, here's the damage when I deliberately remove every talent that strengthens Shadow Ball. In that stripped down state, spell deals roughly 7,000 damage on a non-critical hit and around 11,000 on a critical strike. Now let's do the opposite. This time, I take every relevant talent, apply 3 dots to the target first in order to activate Withering Bolt, and then cast Shadow Bolt under the full setup. In that state, the damage jumps to roughly 23,000 on a non-critical hit and 42,000 on a critical strike. In other words, compared to the unenhanced version, Shadow Bolt can be amplified to nearly 6 times its original damage. And that is what makes this build so interesting. Shadow Bolt is not supposed to be a premium spender like Hunter's Aim Shot or a Destruction Warlock's Chaos Bolt. It is just a basic filler spell, but when that filler starts hitting for 42,000 damage, it creates a very real amount of pressure on the target. Of course, reaching the level of damage depends on Nightfall being active, but with this crit focus setup, Nightfall proc often enough that the empowered version shows up far more consistently than you might expect. Let's look at some actual gameplay. This is Temple of Kotmogu Blitz match. I just found the poorly geared Warlock on the other side. Let's give the team a heads up on this glorious nuke. The opening fight is the most important moment in the entire battleground, so before the clash even starts, I drop a Horde Battle Standard to give the entire team a 15% maximum health increase. From there, the priority is to spread dots onto as many enemies as possible in order to maximize the number of chances for Nightfall to proc, and once Nightfall appears, that's when you start firing Shadow Bolt, not before. So far, things are looking pretty solid. I'm already sitting at second highest damage on the team, while building up a 200 victory points right from the start. Warlocks are actually one of the best classes for carrying an orb. Being a punching bag is literally part of the Warlock's class design. That's all, and don't forget to check the comment.